Hi everybody, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. One of the things I want to talk about this week is this whole idea of what is street photography. I see a lot of debate about what is and what isn't street photography, and if you just do a search on anything regarding street photography on Flickr, on Instagram, and so on, you'll often find a bunch of images that many people would say, well, that isn't street photography. It's a close-up of a flower, and it just seems like a lot of photography has sort of been clumped into this umbrella of street photography. And rather than get into the debate, I wanted to choose three images to just question what makes it or doesn't make it a street photograph. So let's take a look. Here we have a shot by Rick Harris. This was made with a Fujifilm X100F at 1/800th of a second, f8, ISO 200. Now, some people would argue that this isn't a street photograph. They would say that because it doesn't have any people in it, that it doesn't qualify. But if you look at the work of people like William Eggleston, Saul Leiter, Jay Maisel, those photographers who, by anyone's description, can be considered street photographers, make shots like this, where it isn't so much the people that are in the frame, but the scene itself. They're looking at it in terms of color, in terms of light, in terms of shape, and they're using all of those elements in order to make an interesting photograph. What qualifies them as street photographers is just the fact that they're roaming the streets. They're walking the streets of whatever city that they're in, and they're on the hunt, looking for those visual qualities that, when they can bring them together within the context of the frame, can produce an interesting photograph. It's where they are and how they're observing the world that I think really qualifies them as a street photographer. I think what Rick was responding to here is the color play, the powder blue of the car, that little red accent near the rear, how it mirrors the red accent on the structure in the back, and that yellow, how that sort of plays off the blue of the sky, the car. We have it's a gas station back here because you can see the green colors of the numbers. Of the price of the gasoline through the window here in the frame. You have the wonderful shape of the wheel, the shadow. All of that plays off of each other incredibly well, creating a really interesting photograph. It's not just the fact that this is a really cool looking old car with all that rust all over the vehicle. It's the graphic nature of the shot and the fact that, he was able to see this in relationship to the environment. And I think that's one of the important things about a really good street photograph is that it's not solely focused on the subject itself. Sometimes a great street photograph is as much about the environment that the subject is in as the subject. And I think that as simple as this subject is, it's just an old car at a gas station, that he's considering the environment. There's this old sort of dilapidated car, but there are these accents that sort of, contrast that. I mean, just the rims on there seem to be so counterintuitive to the age of the car. I mean, it doesn't fit, and I like that contrast that's created, and also just the sort of the cleanness of the gas station behind, that yellow, white, red stripe. It's just really so clean, and there's a contrast between old and new, old and modern, that's exhibited within the frame. And for me, I think paying attention to those relationships, those little details, is part of what's part and parcel of a good street photograph. It's not just photographing people. Here we have a shot by Christopher Icha. This was shot at f2 at 1/160th of a second. Don't have any ISO information here, though I assume it was probably at a very high ISO. So here we have another picture of a car, but in this case, we have a person here. But I want to suggest that this shot is not just about this person who's looking fairly intently through the windshield of their car. The thing that draws me to this shot is everything else that's in this frame, particularly the taxi sign on the roof of the car, that yellow glow that's mirrored twice on the hood of the car. And then there's this repeating pattern that's mirrored. The shape of that taxi sign is slightly mirrored in those shapes out of those out of focus windows in the distance. Then we have the shape of the windshield that frames the man behind the wheel, and we have the grille in the front, and we have that little circular highlight in the front of the car designating the headlight of the car. This shot is not just about some guy in a car. If you take a look at our Flickr pool or look anywhere where people post street photography, you'll see a lot of pictures of people in cars. The difference between this photograph and those others is that people are taking pictures of people in a car, but they're not considering everything else in the frame. They're just taking a shot of someone that looks kind of interesting, who's in a convertible, who's in a taxi, or who's in a roadster, whatever it is. But they don't really pay attention to everything else within the frame. So it's just a snapshot. What Christopher does here is that even though he may have been initially drawn to the taxi driver and wanted to make a shot, for me, what elevates it to a street photograph is, like the previous shot, he's considering everything else that's in the frame and thinking about how they play off of each other. This driver has this really intent gaze on his face. I don't know if he's angry, if he's just looking for his next fare, whether someone's in his way. But whatever it is, it's very interesting in terms of his facial expression. But the image is built on all those elements that I just described, that many photographers would be completely oblivious to because they're so solely focused on just the human being. What I want to suggest to you is that street photography is about a sensibility about space, the relationship of different elements to each other, especially people, to the things that are around them. I think when photographers are approaching it in that way, they are really speaking to this idea behind street photography being more than just a document of something that's happening on the street, and it just so happens there's a photographer there to document it. It's a way of seeing the world, of seeing people, of seeing objects, and thinking about how can I bring these things in relationship to each other? How can I create a balanced composition that if one element is missing, the whole shot falls apart? And that's the challenge of street photography. And I think in a lot of the shots that we see that don't work, they're not considering it in that way. That's why you have a lot of photographs that people describe as street photographs that just, there's no there. You'll see a bunch of elements in the frame, and if you took out one or two things out, it wouldn't make any difference to the success of the photograph, because so many of those things are distractions. They don't play off the subject or the scene. They're just there in the frame. And if you're able to do that easily, then I don't think that shot proves successful. I don't think that's the case with this photograph. You take any of those elements that I just described and it weakens the shot. And I think that really is at the heart of some of the photographs that I really like that people submit to the Flickr Pool. Okay, here we have a shot by Dean Forbes. This was created with a Fujifilm X-T2 at 320th of a second, f8, ISO 1000. So here we have a shot of a street. This is a street photograph, right? Because it's of a sidewalk and it's of a road and it's shot from overhead. And this shot has all those graphic things that I talked about sans the color. So we have light and shadow. We have line and shape. We have gesture implied by the arrows that exist here and here, and here and here. We have this great shape of the mailbox in the very heart of the image with these shadows that are cast throughout the frame. We even have the shadow of a tree that's outside of the frame here. And we have this human figure here in the lower left-hand corner of the frame. Now, this shot implies the presence of people just by the existence of all these different elements here. The signage, the graffiti on the sidewalk, the sign here for what may be a restaurant or a parking lot, the mailboxes themselves. And then we have this human figure here who serves for me as a nice accent. It's that nice little flourish that helps to complete the shot. This entire frame without the person, I think, would still be a really wonderful photograph because all the reasons that I mentioned. Having the person there is not critical to the success of the shot, but it takes it to that next level. But the shot isn't just about the person. And so many of the shots that we see are just about the people. This is the reverse. This is thinking about the relationships of all these things. And to my mind, there's no way that Dean was not aware of that arrow and that arrow and that arrow within the frame. I mean, just how neatly and tightly framed this composition makes me think that he really carefully considered everything in the scene and waited for a subject to come into just the right spot to help to complete the composition. All right? But think about what I was just saying about the previous two shots, about what qualifies as a street photograph. Consideration of the environment, of the scene, of the space, not just a singular subject. It's not just about the mailboxes. It's not just about the arrow in the road. It's not just about the graffiti on the sidewalk. It's about all of these things that have no relationship to each other in the real world. You know, because you're walking down that street, you may see the mailbox, you may notice the graffiti, but you're not thinking about all these different elements that within the context of the frame all of a sudden have a relationship to each other. And that's what Dean does marvelously here. And again, this is what I'm talking about when I say that street photography is about seeing. It's not just what you're photographing or where you're photographing. It's how you're evaluating everything that's in front of your eye, everything that's in front of your camera, and how you're choosing to build a relationship when you press that shutter release button. I think if you are practicing that kind of seeing, you're practicing street photography. If you're just walking down the street, making snaps, hoping you get something interesting, that's just somebody making photographs. And some of them may qualify as street photographs, some may not. But what I can say is that the people who do practice that sensibility have an incredible consistency about their work, which leaves me with no doubt that this photographer is a street photographer. All right, hope you found that helpful. If you want to find out more about the Candid Frame and the podcast, in which I feature conversations with photographers about their work and careers, you can go to thecandidframe.com, and there you'll find links to all the episodes, including columns that I write on a regular basis, and profiles that I'm now doing on Flickr Pool photographers who submit to our group here. We just started doing that, and hopefully we'll be coming out with those on a regular basis. And if you like what you're seeing here on the YouTube channel, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. All right. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.